My brother committed arson, and my father framed me for it. They thought sacrificing me was a small price to pay to protect his football scholarship. They were wrong. The air tasted of ash and lies. Flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across my father's face, but his expression was as still and hard as granite. He wasn't looking at the charred skeleton of the visitors' locker room, a monument to our high school's football rivalry turned ugly. He wasn't looking at the fire chief shaking his head or the grim-faced sheriff asking questions. He was looking at me, but his eyes were fixed on something far beyond me, a future. Grayson's future. My older brother, Grayson, the golden boy quarterback with a cannon for an arm and a smile that could disarm a battalion, stood slightly behind him. He was a master of feigned distress, his hand running through his perfectly tousled hair as he stared at the ground. He looked like a tragic hero in a play. I just felt sick to my stomach. "Sheriff, if you'll just give us a moment," my father, Arthur Hayes, said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that never failed to get a response. "This is a shock. I need to speak with my sons." The sheriff, a man who had known our family for 20 years and had clapped Grayson on the back after every victory, nodded sympathetically. "Take your time, Arthur." My father's hand clamped onto my shoulder, his grip like iron, and steered me and Grayson toward the polished black of his SUV. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut, sealing us in a bubble of leather and silence, the charade dropped. Arthur's face was no longer that of a concerned father, but a CEO assessing a catastrophic business failure. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask who was responsible. He started with the conclusion. "Grayson's scholarship to state is all but signed," he said, his voice flat, his gaze locked on me in the rearview mirror. "That's a full ride. It's the key to his entire future, the key to the legacy of this family. We are not going to let one stupid emotional mistake burn that to the ground. Do you understand me, Leo?" I didn't answer. I just watched Grayson, who continued his performance of staring at his cleats, his jaw tight. The silence from him was a physical blow, more painful than any accusation my father could level. "He got angry," Arthur continued, his voice a chillingly calm monologue. "The other team was taunting him, they played dirty, and he lost his temper. It was a mistake. But his career, his life, cannot be the price for it. Yours can." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Yours can. I wasn't a son in that moment. I was a variable in an equation, a piece of acceptable collateral damage. "You're a minor, Leo, 17, a good student, no record. You've never been in a day of trouble. They'll go easy on you. Probation, community service, a slap on the wrist. It's a story that makes sense. You were jealous of the rival team, you felt protective of your brother, you acted out. It's a narrative they will accept." "No," I finally managed to whisper, the words scratching my throat. "I won't do it. He has to tell the truth." I looked at Grayson, pleading with my eyes. "Say something. For once in your life, stand up and be a brother." He flinched, a flicker of something guilt, maybe crossing his face before it was extinguished. He wouldn't meet my gaze. The betrayal was complete. "It's not a request, Leo." My father's tone turned to ice. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled something out. It glinted under the dome light of the car. My stomach plummeted. It was my Zippo lighter, the one with the faded initials LH scratched into the side. The one I'd gotten for my 16th birthday and lost over a month ago. I'd torn my room apart looking for it. A firefighter found this near the back entrance of the locker room. Arthur said, his voice dangerously soft as he dangled it between his thumb and forefinger. "It has your initials on it. It probably has your fingerprints all over it. Now, you have two options. You can confess, and we control the narrative. We frame it as a misguided act of loyalty. Or, you can refuse, and they will find this, and they will convict you anyway. Either way, you take the fall. The only difference is whether or not Grayson is saved in the process." The cold reality washed over me. This wasn't a desperate, spur-of-the-moment plan. This was a calculated execution. My father hadn't just decided to sacrifice me. He had come prepared with the murder weapon. He must have found my lighter weeks ago and kept it, a trump card for a day just like this. He had anticipated his golden son's fallibility and had already chosen who would break his fall. I looked from the lighter in his hand to Grayson's bowed head to the reflection of my own pale, shocked face in the window. There was no escape. They had built the cage and were now politely asking me to walk inside and lock the door behind me. 10 minutes later, I was standing in the principal's office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and disappointment. The sheriff sat across from me, his pen poised over a notepad. My father stood by the door, his hand resting reassuringly on Grayson's shoulder. Grayson was finally looking at me, his eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. "Save me." I took a deep, shuddering breath, the taste of ash still on my tongue. The words felt like swallowing glass. "It was me," I said, my voice hollow, a stranger's voice. "I got angry about the game. I lost control. I did it. I set the fire." Quote. In that moment, watching the relief wash over my father's face as Grayson's shoulders finally relaxed, I understood that I hadn't just lost my freedom. I had lost my family. The fire in the locker room was nothing compared to the one that had just incinerated my soul. The 6 months that followed were a masterclass in psychological torture. My world shrank to the dimensions of our house, and the path to and from school a perimeter dictated by the black plastic cuff fastened around my ankle. It was my brand, a constant, humiliating reminder of the lie I was forced to live. The day began and ended with its electronic chirp, a digital warden announcing my curfew. Some nights I'd stand at my bedroom window watching the monitor's small green light blink in the darkness. Through that same window, I'd see Grayson heading out with his friends, his laughter carrying on the night air as he drove off to a party, to a life I had paid for. My room wasn't a bedroom anymore, it was a cell, and the rest of the house was the prison yard. Life in the yard was a quiet, suffocating ordeal. My father treated me like a ghost he was obligated to house. He'd speak through me, not to me. Tell Leo his probation officer called. He'd say to Grayson, even if I was sitting right there at the dinner table. Meals were silent, tense affairs where the only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the unspoken weight of my disgrace. I was a stain on the pristine white canvas of the Hayes family, a problem that had been contained but not eliminated. Grayson, on the other hand, had been reborn. The town, fed the carefully crafted narrative of a family tragedy, saw him as a noble figure who had to endure the shame of his brother's crime. He played the part beautifully. He was somber in public, dedicated on the field, a young man bravely carrying on. At home, he was different. He moved with an air of entitled relief, occasionally dropping casual, cruel remarks designed for my ears only. Tough being stuck inside on a Friday night, huh? He'd say with a smirk as he grabbed his car keys. Guess you should have thought about that before. It was his way of reminding me of my place, of rubbing salt in the wound he had inflicted. He wasn't just a coward, he was a sadist. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in early spring. My father called a family dinner, a rare event. He opened a bottle of expensive wine, something reserved for major celebrations. He poured a glass for himself and a smaller one for Grayson, who was 18 now. He didn't offer me one. I have an announcement, Arthur said, his face glowing with a pride I had never seen directed at me. Grayson received the official offer from state this afternoon. A full athletic scholarship. They weren't deterred by our recent troubles. They see his character. He raised his glass. To Grayson, and to the future he has earned, and the sacrifices we all made to protect it. The sacrifices we all made. The phrase echoed in my head, a grotesque distortion of the truth. They hadn't sacrificed anything. They had sacrificed me. In that moment, something inside me, something that had been slowly cracking for months, shattered completely. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Both of them looked at me, startled, as if a piece of furniture had suddenly moved on its own. I didn't say a word. I just walked out of the room, up the stairs, and into my cell, the electronic chirp of my ankle monitor mocking me with every step. That night, fueled by a rage so cold and clear it felt like sanity, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the attic, a dusty graveyard of forgotten things, and dug through a stack of old boxes labeled Claire. Inside, beneath photo albums and old report cards, I found a small address book, my mother's address book. I hadn't spoken to Claire since she and my father divorced, and she moved across the country 8 years ago. Arthur had painted her as an unstable, ambitious woman who had abandoned her family. I was 10. I believed him. My hands trembled as I found her number and dialed, my heart pounding with a desperate, terrifying hope. What if she didn't believe me? What if she too saw me as the broken son? A woman's voice, hesitant and unfamiliar after so long, answered on the third ring. Hello? Mom? I choked out, my own voice cracking. It's Leo. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by a weighted silence. I began to babble, the story pouring out of me in a frantic, disjointed torrent of fire, the lighter, the conversation in the car, Grayson's silence, my father's command. I told her everything, expecting pity or, worse, disbelief. Instead, when I finally ran out of breath, her voice came back, no longer hesitant but sharp and focused, laced with a steel I had never heard before. Arthur did the same thing to me once, Leo, she said, and the world tilted on its axis. Not with a fire, but with his business. He made a disastrous investment, and when his partners were about to find out, he fabricated a trail of emails to make it look like I was the one who pushed for it, that I had acted recklessly behind his back. He sacrificed my reputation to save his own. It's why I left. She paused, and I could hear her pacing. So, you need to answer a question for me. Do you want to fight? Because I'm not just your mother, Leo. For the last 7 years, my professional title has been private investigator. Quote. The shock of it was like a defibrillator to my flatlining hope. My mother wasn't just a sympathetic ear. She was a weapon. The next few days were a blur of hushed phone calls. Claire instructed me to write down every single detail I could remember about the night of the fire, no matter how insignificant. The process was agonizing. Reliving the betrayal, the fear, the crushing weight of my father's ultimatum, I felt myself starting to splinter. Doubts, planted by months of gaslighting, began to sprout in my mind. What if I was just jealous? What if I was misremembering? What if on some subconscious level I had wanted this to happen? I confessed this spiral of self-doubt to Claire during a late-night call, my voice barely a whisper. "That's what he does, Leo," she said, her voice firm, pulling me back from the edge. Arthur's greatest weapon isn't his anger. It's his ability to make you question your own reality. He did it to me for years. But your reality is the truth. You did not set that fire. We are going to find the person who did. Now, tell me about Grayson's girlfriend. What's her name? Ava, I said, confused by the sudden shift. Why? Because men like your father and your brother, Claire said, her voice turning grim, can't exist in a vacuum. They need an audience. They need someone to confess to brag to unload their guilt upon. And that person is almost always the one they think they control completely. A new path, a terrifying and hopeful one, was beginning to form in the darkness. My internal crisis solidified into a single, hard resolution. I didn't do it, I said, the words finally feeling real, finally feeling like my own. And I'm going to prove it. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. According to my mother, Ava was the weak link in the chain of lies my father had forged. Grayson is arrogant, Claire had explained over the phone, her voice a low, strategic hum. He thinks Ava adores him, that she's his property. He wouldn't see her as a threat. He'd see her as a diary. You need to approach her, Leo. But not with anger, with understanding. My heart hammered against my ribs as I saw her sitting alone at a small table in the corner of the Daily Grind, a coffee shop far from our usual high school haunts. This was the first time I was actively breaking the unspoken rules of my confinement, meeting someone connected to Grayson's world. Under the terms of my probation, I was allowed to be here. Emotionally, it felt like walking into a minefield. I slid into the chair opposite her. She jumped, her eyes wide with panic as she recognized me. "Leo, what are you doing here? You can't be here." I'm not going to do anything, Ava," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could, channeling my mother's calm. "I just need to talk to you." "There's nothing to talk about," she said, already gathering her things, her gaze darting toward the door. "I have to go." "Please," I said, a genuine desperation in my voice. "I'm not here to blame you. I know what it's like. To have him be the center of your universe. To have him decide what's real and what isn't." That stopped her. Her hand froze over her purse. She looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time. The fear in her eyes was still there, but now it was mixed with a flicker of recognition. She slowly sank back into her chair. She didn't say much that first day, but she listened. I talked about the pressure, the constant need to walk on eggshells around Grayson's moods, the way his ambition eclipsed everything and everyone around him. I never once mentioned the fire. I was talking about him, but I was also talking about her. The next meeting, a few days later, my mother joined us. Claire was brilliant. She didn't introduce herself as a private investigator. She was just Claire, Leo's mom. She didn't grill Ava about the case. She asked about Ava's plans for college, about her family, about her life. She created a space of safety. Then, with a gentle, disarming sincerity, she looked at Ava and said, "You seem like a wonderful young woman, Ava, and you deserve to feel safe in your relationship." She slid a business card across the table. It wasn't hers. It belonged to a top domestic abuse lawyer in the city. "You don't have to help us," Claire said softly. "You just need to help yourself. No matter what, you have options." We left without knowing if we had succeeded. For 3 agonizing days, there was only silence. I started to lose hope, thinking we had pushed too hard, that Ava had retreated back into the fortress of Grayson's control. Then, on a Thursday night, an email arrived in my mother's inbox. The sender was an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was empty. There was only one attachment, an audio file named Argument 11 MP3. My mother and I listened to it together in her small home office. The speakers turned low. The audio was crackly at first, then Ava's voice tight with anger. "You can't just talk to me like that, Grayson. You think you own me?" And then Grayson's voice, venomous and loud. "I own this whole damn town right now. Don't you get it? I can do whatever I want." A pause, then the words that stopped my heart. I burned down a building and my idiot brother took the fall for it. My own father handed him the lighter and told him to confess. Do you have any idea the kind of power that is? I'm untouchable. So yes, I will talk to you however I want. Claire simply closed her laptop. The silence in the room was absolute. It was more than a confession. It was a boast. It was a proud declaration of his crime and a detailed account of my father's conspiracy. Ava hadn't set him up. She had been recording their fights out of fear, creating her own insurance policy, and in his hubris, Grayson had handed us everything. My mother did not go to the police. She was more strategic than that. She called my father's lawyer and requested a meeting, including the school principal, under the pretense of discussing Leo's successful reintegration and the possibility of easing his probationary terms. The meeting was held in the school's sterile conference room. My father and Grayson walked in radiating smug confidence. Arthur was in his element, a powerful man graciously managing a family difficulty. Grayson sat beside him looking bored, as if this was all a tedious formality. My father spoke first, a long, condescending speech about how I had learned my lesson, how I was showing remorse, and how the family was healing. He was painting a masterpiece of delusion. When he finished, a self-satisfied smile on his face, my mother leaned forward. She placed her phone on the polished table. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice even and calm. "That's a very compelling version of events. Now, I'd like for us to hear another." She pressed play. Grayson's voice, loud and clear, filled the dead air of the conference room. "I burned down a building, and my idiot brother took the fall for it. My own father handed him the lighter and told him to confess." Time seemed to freeze. The principal's jaw dropped. The lawyer's face went slack with shock. I watched my father. His confident mask didn't just crack, it disintegrated. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, waxy sheen of pure horror. He looked old. He looked weak. Grayson was frozen, his mouth slightly open, a statue of his own arrogance. The recording played on, every word a nail in their coffins. When it finished, no one spoke. The silence was the sound of an entire world being demolished. There was no dramatic confrontation. There were no shouted accusations. It wasn't necessary. The aftermath was swift and clinical. Grayson was arrested. Arthur's name was ruined, his carefully constructed reputation turned to ash overnight. My probation was expunged, the charges dismissed with a formal apology from the district attorney's office. The last day in that house, I packed my things into 2 suitcases. The ankle monitor was gone, the skin beneath it pale and strange. Arthur stood in the doorway of my room, a hollowed-out version of the man he once was. He opened his mouth as if to say something, an apology, an explanation, a justification, but no words came out. I didn't wait to hear them. I just shook my head, a small, final gesture of dismissal. I zipped up my last bag, walked past him without a glance, and didn't stop until I was outside, breathing in the free, clean air. My mother was waiting in her car at the curb, the engine running. As I got in and she pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. There was no triumphant surge of victory, no sweet taste of revenge. There was just a vast, quiet, and profound sense of peace. My life was my own again. The best revenge wasn't loud. It was the silence that followed the storm.